Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's ambitious. We're tackling a really dense chapter on personality and psychopathology from Kaplan and Sadock's comprehensive textbook of psychiatry.
Yeah, it's quite the undertaking. We're basically trying to distill decades, really generations, of clinical thinking.
Right, trying to understand how different schools of thought explain, why we are the way we are and what goes wrong when people experience mental distress.
Exactly. From classic psychoanalysis right through to modern trait psychology, the challenge is making these complex models accessible.
Before we jump into the specific theories, though, there seems to be this one big idea threading through all the dynamic ones. What's that core assumption?
It really is the bedrock. Even when analysts disagreed fiercely, they all started from this idea that our conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg.
So unconscious processes are running the show, or a big part of it.
A huge part. Complex, unconscious mental processes influencing our behavior, our feelings, how we adapt or don't adapt.
And this means symptoms aren't just random noise. They actually mean something.
Precisely, they're like coded messages. Anxiety, depression, even physical symptoms with no clear medical cause, they're seen as carrying hidden meanings.
Often stemming from internal conflicts or maybe early experiences.
Exactly. Intrapsychic conflict or maybe early difficult experiences that the conscious mind just couldn't process at the time.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Sigmund Freud. His big revolutionary idea was connecting mental illness back to childhood.
Right, absolutely. He started with these core assumptions. Psychological determinism, nothing happens by chance mentally, and the power of unconscious processes and conflicts.
And that led him down a path that famously changed direction, didn't it? The trauma hypothesis.
It did. Early on, maybe 1887 to 1897, he was focused on hysteria. Patients with dramatic physical symptoms like paralysis or blindness, but no neurological damage.
Conversion hysteria.
Right. Initially, he believed these were directly caused by repressed memories of intensely emotional traumas, often suggested to be sexual seduction or abuse.
And the treatment was basically talking it out, bringing the memory and the feeling back.
Exactly. The idea was to bring the repressed memory into consciousness and discharge the pent-up emotion, what he called the strangulated affect, through speech, through catharsis.
But then he hit a snag.
A major one. He began to suspect and later became convinced that many of these memories weren't actual events.
They were fantasies.
Yes, related to the child's own internal world, their unconscious wishes, their innate drives, particularly sexual and aggressive ones, biologic tension states, as he saw them.
Wow. So he had to shift focus from external events to the child, to internal drives within the child. That's a fundamental change.
It absolutely forced him to rethink everything. It led him away from external trauma and toward our inner fantasy life and drives.
So how did he model this inner world? First came the topographic model, right?
Correct. He envisioned the mind in layers. At the bottom, the system unconscious or the dynamic unconscious. This is raw, primitive energy.
Driven by the pleasure principle.
Yes, demanding immediate gratification, operating through what he called the primary process think, illogical, associative, wish-fulfilling thinking, mainly sexual and aggressive drives down there.
And contrasting with that.
Is the system conscious? This is our rational, reality-oriented mind. It operates via the secondary process, logic, reason, weighing consequences, dealing with external reality and safety.
And the conflict is between these two systems.
Precisely. The repressed forces pushing up from the unconscious versus the repressing forces trying to keep them down. The symptom, then, is a kind of compromise formation between the two.
Okay, but that model didn't seem to capture everything. Because later, around 1923, he introduced the really famous one, id, ego, superego, the structural model.
That's right. He felt he needed distinct agencies or structures within the mind.
So let's break those down. The id, what's its role?
The id is pure, raw, instinctual energy. Completely unconscious, totally unorganized. It's the reservoir of our basic sexual and aggressive drives, operating solely on that pleasure principle. I want it now.
And the superego, is that like the conscience?
Essentially, yes. It's the internalized voice of parents and society, our morals, ideals, prohibitions. It's the source of guilt, the shoulds and should-nots, and it's also largely unconscious.
So the poor ego is caught in the middle.
Exactly. The ego is the executive branch, trying to mediate the demands of the impulsive aid, the restrictive superego, and the constraints of external reality.
It's mostly unconscious, too.
Mostly, yes, but it has conscious aspects. It's the organized reality testing part. It controls our ability to move, perceive, think logically, and crucially, it uses defense mechanisms to manage all that conflict.
That description makes the ego sound pretty weak, almost just reactive. Did later thinkers build on that, give the ego a bit more agency?
They definitely did. That was the whole point of ego psychology, with key figures like Anna Freud, his daughter, and Heinz Hartmann.
What was their main contribution?
They argued the ego wasn't just a mediator born out of conflict. It had its own independent, autonomous functions right from the start. Things like perception, memory, motor control that are crucial for adapting to the world separate from instinctual drives.
And this led to a deeper look at defense mechanisms. Anna Freud's work.
Yes, she really systematized the study of defenses. The crucial insight was that defenses aren't inherently bad. They're necessary coping strategies the ego uses.
But they can become pathological.
Of course. They exist on a spectrum. They were often classified based on developmental maturity or how much they distort reality.
Okay, let's touch on those levels. What are the most primitive ones like?
Those are the narcissistic psychotic defenses. These involve a significant break with reality. Think denial on a massive scale, or projection where you attribute your own unacceptable feelings to others, sometimes reaching delusional levels, basically avoiding or radically twisting reality.
And a step up from that, the immature ones.
Right, the immature defenses, often seen in personality disorders, things like regression acting much younger under stress, or somatization feeling psychological pain as a physical symptom, like a headache or stomachache, because the emotion itself is too much to handle.
Then we get to the ones that sound, well, more familiar. The neurotic defenses.
Yeah, these are super common, even in generally healthy people. They help manage distressing feelings without totally distorting reality. Think rationalization, finding a plausible excuse for something you did that bothers you.
Or kicking the cat because you're mad at your boss displacement.
Exactly. Shifting feelings onto a less threatening target.
And finally, the gold standard. Mature defenses.
These are the healthy adaptive ones. Things like humor, being able to see the irony or absurdity in difficult situations. Or altruism, dealing with your own stress by helping others. Using these shows good ego strength.
That framework is really helpful for thinking about coping styles. But the field kept evolving, didn't it? The focus shifted again from internal drives and ego functions towards relationships.
It absolutely did. This is the realm of object relations theory. Thinkers like Melanie Klein, Winnicott, Fairbairn, they argued the fundamental human motivation isn't just drive-discharge like sex or aggression. It's the drive to relate to others, to objects.
Objects meaning people or parts of people.
Initially, yes, especially for infants. Clayton talked about relating to part objects. Not the whole mother, but the good breast that nourishes and comforts versus the bad breast that frustrates or is absent.
And she had those really distinct developmental positions, the paranoid schizoid and the depressive.
Yes, very influential ideas. The early paranoid schizoid position is characterized by splitting, keeping good and bad experiences separate and projection, like attributing one's own aggressive impulses to the bad object, leading to fear.
And then ideally, the infant moves on.
To the depressive position. This is a major developmental achievement. The infant starts to see the mother as a whole person, with both good and bad aspects. This leads to concern, guilt over previous destructive feelings, and a wish to repair.
Then there's D.W. Winnicott, who gave us such memorable concepts. Good enough mothering.
Right, emphasizing that perfect parenting isn't needed, just parenting that's attuned and responsive enough to allow the child's sense of self to develop.
And the transitional object, everyone knows that one, the security blanket, the favorite teddy bear.
Exactly. Winnicott saw this as crucial. It's the infant's first not-me possession. It exists in this special intermediate space between subjective fantasy, it's part of me, and objective reality. It's a separate thing.
What's its function?
It helps the child navigate the difficult transition from a feeling of merging with the mother to recognizing separateness. It provides comfort and helps tolerate frustration and anxiety during separation. It's a bridge to reality.
Which seems like a perfect lead-in to attachment theory. Bowlby and Ainsworth took these relationship ideas and studied them empirically.
Precisely. Bowlby, influenced by ethology, argued that the infant's need for proximity to a caregiver is a primary biologically based drive for survival and safety.
And based on how the caregiver responds, the child builds expectations.
Exactly. They develop an internal working model of relationships, a set of expectations about whether caregivers are likely to be available and responsive in times of need.
And Mary Ainsworth famously tested this with the strange situation experiment. What did she find?
She identified distinct patterns of attachment. There's secure attachment. The child explores confidently when the caregiver is there, gets upset when they leave, but is easily soothed upon reunion. That's the ideal.
And the insecure patterns.
Right. Anxious avoidant. The child seems indifferent to the caregiver leaving, avoids contact when they return, almost like they've learned not to expect comfort.
And anxious resistant.
Or preoccupied.
That child is often clingy, gets extremely distressed when the caregiver leaves, but then upon reunion, they're hard to soothe. They might seek contact but also resist it, showing anger or ambivalence, often linked to inconsistent caregiving.
And there is a fourth, more troubling pattern. Yes, disorganized, disoriented. These children show contradictory behaviors like freezing or approaching the caregiver while looking away fearfully. It often suggests the caregiver has been a source of fear, perhaps due to trauma or abuse. And these patterns tend to persist into adulthood, shaping our later relationships.
Okay, so we've covered the sort of core psychoanalytic lineage, but the 20th century wasn't just Freud and his descendants, right? There were other dynamic thinkers with different angles.
Yeah.
What about Adolf Meyer?
Meyer's approach, psychobiology, was really quite different. Very pragmatic. He wasn't so interested in deep unconscious conflicts. He rejected the idea that mental illness was some fixed, predetermined thing.
So what did he focus on?
The whole person in their environment, across their entire life. He emphasized detailed biographical study to understand the person's unique, lifelong, habitual reaction patterns. How do they typically respond to challenges?
And the therapy.
Was focused on habit training, helping patients identify maladaptive patterns and consciously develop better, more functional ways of reacting and adapting to life's stresses. Very practical.
Makes sense. Now, Alfred Adler, he's famous for the inferiority complex, right?
That's his best-known concept, yeah. Individual psychology. Adler believed the fundamental human striving is to move from a felt sense of inferiority, that feeling of smallness and helplessness we all start with, towards mastery, competence, and superiority.
And problems arise when that striving goes wrong.
Exactly. He saw emotional disorders as mistaken lifestyles based on faulty assumptions about oneself and the world, leading to maladaptive goals. Therapy aimed to correct these mistaken beliefs, foster social interest, a sense of connection and contribution to community, and change life goals.
Using techniques like reframing.
Yes, reframing difficulties, offering encouragement, sometimes even paradoxical communication to shift perspective.
Okay. And then Harry Stack Sullivan. His focus was squarely on relationships, wasn't it? Interpersonal theory.
Absolutely. For Sullivan, personality wasn't some internal structure. It was the relatively enduring pattern of recurrent interpersonal situations that characterize a human life. It's all about interactions.
What drove behavior for him?
Primarily anxiety, which he saw as arising from threats to one's security in interpersonal relationships, stemming from unmet needs for satisfaction, like biological needs, and security, belonging, acceptance.
He also had those interesting cognitive modes. Prototaxic, parataxic?
Yes. Prototaxic is the infant's raw, undifferentiated stream of experience. Parataxic is seeing causal connections between things that aren't logically related just because they happen close together in time. This, he thought, explained things like superstitions and transference.
Seeing the therapist, like your father, for example.
Exactly. And syntactic mode is mature, logical, rational thought and communication using shared symbols like language.
And Sullivan placed special importance on a particular relationship for development, didn't he?
He did. The pre-adolescent chum relationship. Having a close same-sex friend during that period he believed was incredibly important.
Why?
Because it's the first truly intimate relationship outside the family where you experience mutual validation and acceptance. It offers a chance to correct relational distortions or deficits from earlier family experiences.
Fascinating. Okay, lastly in this group, let's touch on thinkers who really brought culture and gender into the psychoanalytic conversation, challenging Freud's biological determinism. Karen Horney.
Horney strongly emphasized cultural factors. She saw personality centering on the struggle between the real self, our authentic core, and the pressures to conform to an idealized image.
And neurosis results from this conflict.
Yes, she described neurotic trends ingrained, compulsive patterns of relating, like moving toward people, compliance, moving against them, aggression, or moving away from them, detachment. These arise as defenses against basic anxiety, which she saw rooted in feelings of helplessness in a potentially hostile world.
And Nancy Chodorow, focusing specifically on gender.
Right. Her work, particularly the reproduction of mothering, asked why women overwhelmingly are the primary caregivers. She argued it's not biology, but social structures and psychodynamics.
How so?
Because girls develop their gender identity in relation to their mother, with whom they identify. Boys, however, must define their masculinity largely in opposition to the mother, pushing away from that primary identification.
Lighting tube.
Chodorow argued this makes masculine identity potentially more fragile, built on separation and denial of dependency, which can create difficulties with intimacy and relational connection later in life compared to women, whose identity development emphasizes connection.
Okay, that's a lot of dynamic theory. Now let's shift gears dramatically towards observation, measurement, and even philosophy. Where did early ideas about personality types come from?
Well, long before psychology as a science, you had philosophers grappling with character. Plato described 5 types of character. Aristotle gave us the concept of virtue as a golden mean between 2 extremes.
Like courage being the midpoint between cowardice and recklessness.
Exactly. The idea that vice, or pathology, represents an imbalance or an extreme too much or too little of a quality is ancient, but it still resonates in how we think about disorders.
Then, fast forward to the 20th century, and we get the rise of behaviorism. B.F. Skinner took a very hard line, didn't he?
Extremely hard line. Radical behaviorism essentially threw out the internal world, mind, feelings, unconscious. Skinner said personality is nothing more than a person's repertoire of learned behaviors.
Learn how?
Through reinforcement operant conditioning. Behaviors followed by rewards become more likely. Those followed by punishment become less likely. Psychopathology, for Skinner, wasn't a sign of inner conflict. It was simply learned maladaptive behavior. The symptom was the problem.
But that felt too simplistic for some. Social learning theorists like Bandura and Rotter brought cognition back in.
They did. They acknowledged that thinking matters. Rotter introduced locus of control. Do you generally believe outcomes depend on your own actions, internal locus, or on external forces like luck or powerful others, external locus? That belief shapes behavior.
And Bandura.
Bandura emphasized observational learning or vicarious reinforcement. We don't just learn from our own rewards and punishments, we learn by watching others. Seeing someone else succeed or fail after a certain behavior powerfully influences whether we'll try it ourselves. Self-efficacy, our belief in our ability to succeed, was also key for him.
Okay, so behaviorists focused on learning. Then you had the humanistic psychologists reacting against both behaviorism and the negativity they saw in psychoanalysis. Maslow, Rogers.
Right, the third force.
Yeah.
They emphasized positive human potential, free will, and the drive towards growth and meaning.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, arguing we have basic needs, physiological, safety, that must be met before we can pursue higher needs like belonging, esteem, and ultimately self-actualization, fulfilling our unique potential.
And Carl Rogers.
Rogers believed organisms have an inherent tendency toward growth and actualization. Psychopathology, he thought, arises when societal judgments force us to distort our true feelings and experiences, creating incongruence between our real self and our self-concept. Therapy, then, involves providing unconditional positive regard, empathy, and genuineness conditions where the client feels safe enough to drop defenses and reconnect with their actualizing tendency.
Which brings us pretty much up to the present day, and the dominant model in academic personality psychology, trait theory, specifically the 5-factor model, the Big Five.
Yes, this is the consensus model, largely based on statistical analysis of language used to describe personality. It proposes 5 broad universal dimensions.
Let's list them. ADOAC is the acronym.
Right. Neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety, depression, anger. Extroversion, sociability, assertiveness, positive emotionality. Openness to experience imagination, intellectual curiosity, artistic interest. Agreeableness, compassion, cooperativeness, trust. And conscientiousness, organization, discipline, dutifulness.
And these traits can be linked to pathology.
Definitely. Different combinations of extreme scores can describe various maladaptive styles. For example, very high neuroticism plus very low exile. Agreeableness might describe someone prone to hostility and anger, a temperamental style. Very low conscientiousness is linked to impulsivity, lack of planning, and under-controlled style.
Now, here comes maybe the most startling finding from the chapter related to these traits. Their stability.
It really is quite striking and, frankly, counterintuitive for many people, especially therapists. Large-scale longitudinal studies show that after about age 30, these basic personality traits are remarkably stable over the rest of the lifespan.
People don't fundamentally change their core personality much in adulthood?
The evidence suggests, not drastically, no. And here's the other kicker. Studies looking at environmental influences find that the shared environment, things like growing up in the same house, parental styles, family income, diet, seems to have very little lasting effect on adult personality traits.
Seriously, so it's mostly genetics and
Genetics play a huge role in the non-shared environment. That means the unique experiences individuals have, even within the same family, different friends, different accidents or illnesses, maybe subtle differences in parental treatment. Those unique experiences shape us, but the common family stuff, less so than we thought for these core traits.
Wow, that has huge implications. How does this model get used clinically then?
Well, knowing someone's trait profile is useful, and one interesting application is using observer ratings, getting ratings from people who know the person well, like a spouse or parent.
Why is that helpful?
Because self-perception can be biased. Observer ratings often predict behavior and outcomes better. In couples therapy, for instance, you can do what's called crossover analysis.
How does that work?
Let's say a husband rates his wife as extremely high on hostility, low agreeableness, high neuroticism. But the wife rates herself as extremely high on anxiety and dependency, high neuroticism maybe.
Ah, so her hostile behavior might actually be driven by anxiety.
It could be. Her yelling might be a desperate, albeit maladaptive way of trying to get reassurance or emotional help because she feels anxious and dependent. But he only perceives it as an attack. Seeing that discrepancy between her self-perception, anxious, and his perception, hostile, can be incredibly illuminating for therapy. It changes the understanding of the interaction.
Okay, we've covered an immense amount of ground here. From Freud's couch in 19th century Vienna, looking at repressed instincts, all the way to 21st century factor analysis and the big five personality traits.
It's quite a journey through how we've tried to understand the mind.
Despite the huge differences in approach, that thread of the internal world, our developmental history, seems to persist, doesn't it?
It does. Whether it's called the unconscious, internal working models, or cognitive schemas, the idea that our past shapes our present, often in ways we aren't fully aware of, remains central.
Which leads us to the final really provocative thought that the source material itself raises.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, especially given what we just discussed about trait stability.
If the big five personality traits are so stable after age 30, and if longitudinal studies show that normal life experience doesn't really change them much, how does psychotherapy actually work?
Right. If therapy can't fundamentally change your basic personality traits after a certain age, what is it achieving? Especially long-term dynamic therapy.
It's a profound question for the field. What's the suggested answer in the text?
The thinking is, well, maybe therapy doesn't radically change core traits, but it helps people adapt to their own nature more effectively.
So working with your personality, not necessarily overhauling it.
Exactly. It might help you develop better coping strategies to manage the difficult aspects of your stable traits, like learning mindfulness if you're high in neuroticism. Or perhaps even modest improvements in how you manage your traits can be enough to significantly improve functioning and well-being.
Especially if intervention happens earlier.
Possibly, yes. Intervening in adolescence or early adulthood, before traits fully set, might allow for more substantial change. But even later, helping someone understand and adapt to who they are can be incredibly valuable. It reframes the goal.
Adaptation as a form of mastery. That's a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much for taking this incredibly deep dive with us today.
Thank you. It was a fascinating tour.